Jace, Kaido, and Kaya delve deeper into the recreation of Elesh Norn's citadel built inside the seed core. It was airy and infinite, with golden light coming from no obvious source of illumination. The air glittered with the dissonant harmony of Phyrexian choirs. Jace didn't look good. The wires growing through his bones were starting to break through the skin. It had weaved itself around his arm, and he had shifted the bag holding the Silex to his other shoulder. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Ether Hub. I'm Simon, bringing you more Magic the Gathering lore. Today's the day, the finale to the Phyrexia All Will Be One main story. This chapter will reveal if our heroic planeswalkers and the sacrifices of their friends come out on top, or if it was all in vain. In the previous chapter, which you can find in a playlist linked in the description below, we watched as the strike team finally make it to the center of New Phyrexia, finding a vivisected Karn and preparing to set off the Silex. Only they now appear to be too late. The corrupted world tree Realmbreaker has already connected to the multiverse, and Phyrexian agents venture to infect countless worlds. The group still believes there's hope. A mortally wounded Jace prepares to sacrifice himself to save what worlds he can. Before we begin, I just want to thank all of you so much for the support we've received for the All Will Be One videos. It's really been crazy, and just like that, the channel is about to crest to 100,000 subscribers. The channel couldn't have done it without you guys, lovers of stories and the lore of a cardboard game. It's been a humbling road, and I think the finale of Phyrexia All Will Be One is the absolute best place for me to just formally thank you guys. I'm not sure what I'm going to do to celebrate hitting the 100k mark, maybe just a simple Q&A stream? So if you'd like to ask me a question about anything, be sure to leave it as a comment on this video. Oh, and stay till the end of the video because I'll be discussing my thoughts on this final chapter, and believe me, there's a lot to discuss. With that, let's continue with the final chapter, Chapter 5 of the Phyrexia All Will Be One story, Inevitable Resolutions by Shauna McGuire. Kaya thought it a bad sign that Jace let them see how far gone he was, rather than casting a soothing illusion over himself. Himoto, a spirit appearing as a Tanuki drone, was cooing at Kaido's side, rubbing his cheek and trying to soothe him. Kaya thought about cracking a joke about needing a teddy bear, but honestly, she wished she had brought a friend with her as well. Though he was a stranger to her, Kaido shared in his hatred of this place. On his home plane of Kamigawa existed Bozaiju, the great tree that lived in harmony with everything around it. It was filled with spirits called Kami, but in this place, the spirits must have been consumed along with everything else, or they would be screaming without end. The Kami were not like the spirits Kaya was used to dealing with. The Kami were born immortal. Kaya was used to spirits that were born from death, but with as much death as this plane had seen, there were no spirits. There was nothing. Phyrexia didn't release its victims, not even in death. The halls around them were empty, which felt less like luck and more like a trap. Jace hadn't turned quite yet, and he still had the Silex. Still, their hope seemed more helpless after leaving Elspeth behind. Something about her made it easy to believe the impossible. Elspeth was left to duel with her lost friend Anjani, who had been completed and enthralled by Elesh Norn. The ceiling gave way to clear panels mimicking a fly's wings, but split with dark veins pulsing with glistening oil. Through the panels, they could see bridges filled with endless ranks of Phyrexian warriors in the red and white of Elesh Norn's factions, marching to the waiting invasion ships. Kaido spotted a hole in the floor that looked like it was meant to be an entrance to a stairway, except whoever had made it forgot to build the actual stairs. Roughly a 10-foot drop led to a hovering disc of white metal with no walls surrounding it. There was another hole in the disc below, exposing Realmbreaker's trunk until it vanished into mist. This was as close to the core root of the tree as they were going to come. Kaya phased herself intangible and dropped onto the disc below, now smelling ozone, mycosynth, and a perversion of Kaldheim's sweet air. Jace teetered on the edge of the hole and finally jumped to be caught by Kaya, who desperately tried to avoid the writhing cords coming from his body. Jace unpacked the Silex, revealing it to the Phyrexian air for the first time as Kaido jumped down nimbly. Kaido asked if it was safe for them to be this close. Kaya explained that Urza detonated the original Silex in his lap and he survived. They'd be fine. Probably. Assuming the plane survived and the shockwave traveling up the tree didn't rip New Phyrexia apart from core to crust. It could still send the last of the Mirrans into oblivion. If Nahiri had survived her fall and not yet turned, she would be blotted out in an instant of the blast. So would they. Kaya felt uneasy as Jace moved into a cross-legged position with the Silex in his lap. The invasion tree had connected. The Silex could damage or destroy every plane in contact with Realmbreaker. They had no way of knowing which planes they were, but they would be casualties. The Silex obliterates everything it touches. Even time was fractured when Urza set the original off. If the blast could travel through the omen paths of the tree, it could destroy everything. They could even blow up the blind eternities. Jace was dying, and he didn't blame Kaya and Kaido if they killed him before he could turn his powers against them. He had spent so much time and effort trying not to destroy the minds of others just because he could, or moving in a multiverse so simply without causing endless damage. He would become an incredible weapon for New Phyrexia. Now they were starting to speak through him, and his eyes flashed an inhuman blue, brighter than usual. Jace tries to compose himself. They weren't going to destroy anything with the Silex. They would only be preventing greater deaths. There was no other way than to bring the ending, to renew it all. Jace was willing to sacrifice countless planes, possibly even the entire multiverse, in order to stop the Phyrexians. Kaya knew what was rattling through Jace's slipping mind. Phyrexia had to be stopped, but not at the cost of the multiverse itself. Kaya lunged forward, grabbing Jace's wrist before he could pick the Silex up again. She pulled a dagger from her belt as Jace's eyes began to glow. Kaido was confused for a moment, and then realized that he should draw his sword also. On the bridge over the void, Ajani's axe clashed against Elspeth's sword, pushing her back even as she dug her heels into the sinewy surface and tried to stand her ground. Ajani willed her to join him, to be ideal, to be one. If he had sounded any less like himself, Elspeth might have been able to undercut his ankles and send him toppling into the depths. Instead, his voice was calm, carrying only genuine affection and concern. Ajani tried to convince her that Phyrexia was no one's enemy, that they only wanted to bring peace and perfection. Elspeth retorted that New Phyrexia was everyone's enemy. Ajani resolved to say that she didn't have to be alive to join them, finally attacking without holding back. He narrowly missed Elspeth's head, swinging his axe with a blast of destructive magical force. Not far from Elspeth and Ajani, Tyvar used his blades to keep the twin barbs of Tybalt's tail at bay. Tyvar's skin was still metallic and gleaming, his entire body having converted into glimmervoid metal for the protection it could offer him against the glistening oil that dripped from Tybalt's body. Tybalt taunted Tyvar, telling him there would be no heroic sagas in his name, only tales of failure. Tybalt whipped his tails as Tyvar blocked them with his glimmervoid arms. Tyvar hissed in pain. Tybalt hissed in pleasure. The two united for the first and perhaps only time in their acquaintance. Tyvar was resistant to Tybalt's magic, a cloud of doubt that infected all around him, because Tyvar was too confident to understand why he should doubt his convictions. Tybalt told him most were not so devoid of concerns, turning towards Elspeth as smoke leaked from his mouth. Doubt was the greatest weapon of them all. A wave of misery and doubt washed over Elspeth. This was her fault. If she had been a better student, less distracted with her own problems, strong enough to save Mirrodin from falling to Phyrexia, then Ajani wouldn't have been infected. Ajani landed a blow that knocked the weapon from her hand, and Elspeth could only back away. Tybalt cackled, stabbing at Tyvar, who was horrified to see Elspeth retreat. Seeing her lose her faith made him feel like all was lost. Elspeth fell back under waves of despair and doubt. She had failed. They had all failed. Ajani was lost, and her home was lost. It ripped at her, tearing away the veils of virtue and compassion she had worked for, until only her core was exposed. Ajani, seeing his opening, swung his axe at the exposed back of her neck. Elspeth blocked the blow from Ajani, fighting against Tybalt's lies. Tybalt turned his attention back to Tyvar, stabbing with the barbs of his tail. Tyvar grabbed one behind the stinger as the glimmervoid metal spread from Tyvar's body to Tybalt, and the flesh that was left on the planeswalker's body seemed to almost pull away. Tyvar's magic suppressed whatever it touched, and Tybalt's manufactured doubts couldn't touch what it couldn't reach. Elspeth's stance grew in confidence by the moment, and as Tybalt's body was engulfed by the glimmervoid metal, a pulse of hope, strong enough that it felt like it should have burned the infection entirely from Phyrexia, surged from her body. To Elspeth, doubt was nothing. Doubt didn't change what was right. Light blasted out from her blade, Luxior, with swirling halo encapsulated in the hilt. Elspeth slammed the hilt of her sword across the back of Ajani's neck. knocking him to the ground unconscious. She looked over to Tyvar, who assured her he could handle Tybalt. Elspeth ran to help with the Silex, and glancing back, she saw Tyvar catch Tybalt's second tail and stab him where his heart should have been. Tybalt let out an agonizing scream, and then she heard a sickening crunch after Tyvar sent the devil over the edge of the bridge. Kaya lunged for Jace, but she just stumbled through the telepath's projected image. Jace pleaded with her. Detonating the Silex might destroy the multiverse, but it also might just shake him a little bit. Kaya couldn't know that Jace was reading her mind, but it certainly felt like he was. The Jace she had known was always careful not to invade the privacy of the minds of others. Abruptly, there were 3 of him between Kaya and the Silex. Kaya couldn't read minds, but she could read spirit energy, and 2 of the Jaces didn't have spirits. She pointed out the real Jace to Kaido, who flung a handful of shuriken to stop him. As Kaido's telekinesis drove the projectiles into Jace's injured arm, the 2 illusions flickered and died. The waving wires on his arm resembled the tendrils of Vraska's hair, and those strands started to light up at the tips. Kaido's shuriken had severed several strands, leaving them to writhe and die on the floor, and cut shallow, bloodless lines into Jace's skin. The speed of Phyrexian completion was a nightmare. They knew they had to save the multiverse, to remove the Silex from the completed Jace. All the planes Phyrexia hasn't touched are connected to the Blind Eternities as well. If they blow up the tree now, they could wipe out everything. Kaido suddenly remembered the Wanderer, who was probably traveling through the Blind Eternities. Any planeswalker in transit might perish. Kaya grabbed the Silex, but she'd fallen for another of Jace's illusions. Jace looked at her from across the rim of the real Silex, still in his hands. Then, he disappeared. On the other side of his illusion, Jace parted the skin of his forehead with his thumbnail. What dripped from the wound into the Silex was not blood, it was glistening oil. Jace forced his grief and fury, the suffering and sorrow-drenched agony of Mirrodin, into the bowl. Regret for the multiverse, and the love of Vraska. The words didn't matter, Jace knew that, but they felt right anyway. Urza had said them long ago. Teferi had seen it, and Kaya through him, and Jace through her. Wipe the land clear. Bring the ending, he murmured. I'm sorry. His voice echoed in the enclosed space, impossibly loud, as light bloomed inside the bowl of the Silex, crawling upwards to the rim. Neither Kaido or Kaya saw Elspeth drop through the hole in the ceiling and race across the room towards Jace. Elspeth was confused at the scene she was witnessing. Kaido and Kaya looked concerned beyond measure, while Jace was racked with guilt. She understood the situation and acted decisively. Without hesitation, Elspeth drove her sword through Jace and shoved him aside. His body took Luxior with him as he fell, and Elspeth grabbed for the Silex. As light crested over the lip of the Silex, she planeswalked, bound for some unknown destination past the Blind Eternities. Tyvar dropped through the hole to join Kaido, Kaya, and Jace's slumped form. Instead of his footfall, they heard massive booms consuming all other sound. Realmbreaker's trunk pulsed with light. Each pulse lit the air with an oily, slick array of colors, yanking the world around them through a cycle of nights and days. The tree had been fully activated and was transmitting through the multiverse. The shock knocked Kaido, Kaya, and Tyvar to the floor, and in the rapidly pulsing light, none of them saw the moment when the wall irised open like an eye, allowing the smell of aether to fill the previously sealed room. Phyrexians now walked the Omen Path, carrying disaster with them. Each vessel with its heavy burden of Phyrexian invaders reached another plane, where they would spread their infection. An opening in the wall of the tree got larger. Footsteps coming from the other side, they were about to have company. A figure almost skeletally thin, made of red tissue and gleaming porcelain white metal, stepped into the room. Elesh Norn turned to them and smiled, as a squadron of Phyrexian warriors slipped in after her. Kaido gasped at the sight of Tamio, the companion he had once fought alongside on Kamigawa, moving among them. Elesh Norn welcomed them to Phyrexia as Jace's body shuddered and stood, then moved to join his new master. Luxior fell from his body, and Kaido grabbed it up quickly. Elesh Norn laughed, offering them her idea of peace and harmony. Why resist? Their friends were already with her. All will be one. Her subordinates parted, letting Nahiri through. She had clearly not survived her fall. The spikes that had grown out of her neck were more pronounced now, mimicking the cloud of blades she often summoned. Her hands were gone, replaced at the elbow by metal blades. Cracks in her skin showed molten metal inside her body, and her eyes glowed with that same terrible heat. Another figure followed her on a bundle of cables, using the root-like formation of her lower body like tentacles as she settled by the other Phyrexian side. Extra appendages sprouted from the woody protrusions covering her flesh. Her face, like Tamiyo's, was marked with glistening oil. It was Nissa Ravane, but the soft-spoken animist Kaya Nu was gone. Elesh Norn explained in her own rationality that Nahiri fought them, but was able to find peace and a better way in the One. She and Nissa came from the same place, but they were never friends. Now they're sisters, united finally on the same side in every way. They are one. Kaido, Kaya, and Tyvar could all be one. Each of them declined, and Elesh Norn resigned to call them enemies. She raised her hand, clicking her perfect claws together, and the invasion began. Man, this story was destined to be epic in scale, and epic it was. I cannot tell you guys how pleased I've been with this story. It's a real step up from a lot of the lore for MTG that we've gotten in recent years. And yeah, while I can sit back and complain that the stories are still just not long enough in 5 online articles, it was still excellently crafted and delivered what I believed was needed for fans of the story. Consequences. War of the Spark didn't have any, All Will Be One is full of it. So with the story coming to a close, we find that our heroes lost. Not only did they lose, but they lost badly. Many friends have fallen to Phyrexia, and they could not stop Elesh Norn from enacting her plan. The Phyrexians now actively invade the planes of the multiverse, as Jace, Vraska, Nahiri, Nissa, Luca, Tybalt, Tamiyo, and Ajani all fight for their mother of machines. First, there are some gleaming points of lore that aren't covered in this main story that I'll bring up in future videos from side stories, such as the completion of Nissa. She sort of just appears in this story, but don't worry, it gets explained a bit more in a story featuring Luca, which I'll cover. Elspeth Tirel gets her big moment, where all doubt is removed and she again stands as the hero she believes herself to be. She doesn't have to kill her infected friend Ajani, leaving their encounter feeling a bit unresolved, but she does make a noble sacrifice. We have no clue what the Silex blast could do to her. Urza survived the blast, but there isn't any concrete evidence that outcome is always the case. She had her Tony Stark Avengers 1 moment, taking the bomb away from others and exploding it in between the realms, in the Blind Eternities itself. As for her fate, if I had to guess, she survives but is changed. There were hints that Elspeth was in fact the descendant of angels on New Capenna. Perhaps now she will become an angel planeswalker reborn from the Silex blast. It's weird we didn't get a completed Tybalt planeswalker card in the set. We knew he would likely be completed since he was infected back on call time, but being in this story and not getting a card feels like a missed opportunity. Still, I'm not sure of the biology of completed planeswalkers, but Tybalt may have been actually killed by Tyvar. Still, judging by Jace being killed and just rising again completed, the same as Nahiri, it's probably safe to say the half-devil Phyrexian may still be out there. We still don't know the fate of Koth and Karn. Karn was stuck in the roots of Realmbreaker, and Koth was set to free him. If they succeeded, they would both be available for the coming conflict. While the heroes may have failed here on New Phyrexia, there is still hope, as a connected multiverse means introducing more allies to the fight that aren't only planeswalkers. Titanic figures of lore, gods, legends can now join the fight to rid their planes and all planes of Phyrexia's blight. However, I'm not too sure there's a way to save the already completed planeswalkers from their fates. I mean, they literally have complete organ systems and nearly all their flesh replaced by machinery. How do you save someone from that? Now, I'm not saying they can't do some timey-wimey nonsense and just hard reset everything, but that to me would be a travesty. Again, making these huge consequences mean virtually nothing. Now to address the elephant in the room and the basis for a lot of comments I've been getting. Why are planeswalkers being completed so easily? Tamiyo was the first completed planeswalker, and it took the reality chip device and surgery from Jin Cataxius for it to work. But now, even a drop of glistening oil can convert a planeswalker? What happened? Maybe Jin Cataxius' research found a way to make a more potent oil. But if that's the case, then Tybalt shouldn't have turned because he was infected before Tamiyo. I don't know. This is where I ask you guys for some help. Did I miss something in the story that explains this better? Let me know in the comments, because otherwise, I just don't know. Anyway guys, that's going to do it for today's video. Remember, if you enjoyed it, show your support by leaving it a like, becoming a subscriber, and of course, sharing it with your friends. Remember to keep an eye out for new releases as I cover more of the side stories, as well as present my theories for the future of MTG storytelling. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, see ya!